broad considerations in upland Gamebird management. I'm going to focus a little bit, not entirely, but a little bit on Tennessee with some of these slides. But our guest speaker next Thursday is Roger Shields, who's the state turkey biologist, and he's going to come talk specifically about turkey management in Tennessee today. I'm going to, with regard to turkeys, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of turkey reestablishment, the translocation history in Tennessee, but I'm going to talk more about kind of the past, how we got to where we are today, and I'll let Roger deal with more where we are now. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about turkeys, a little bit about ruffed grouse, a little bit about northern bobwhite, and a few. I'm going to kind of skip around a few general things. Has anybody seen this slide before?
No, but I have a quick question if you don't mind.
Sure. What's your question?
So a lot of like wildlife agencies in their regulations books, they classify turkeys as big game instead of upland. Where is that important? Or
Yeah, it's really not. I think I mentioned before that there's several of these groups that can kind of fall into numerous categories. So these categories are not factual categories; they're categories of convenience or political ways that they're affiliated in ways that make it easier to manage them politically as a group. Turkeys are big. They're not fur bearers. They're not waterfowl. Although you could put them in with small game, quail and rabbits, really a lot of the way that we manage turkeys and the habitat that we manage for turkeys is very similar to deer. So since they're relative to other birds, perhaps a little bit more case selected, they often group them as in with big game. So, but it's kind of arbitrary. Fair question. Yeah, good. Other questions? Okay. Nobody's seen this chart before? Probably about 20 years ago, I swear, every other presentation in the eastern United States and the southeast, I swear, had this chart in it. It showed long-term declines over the past several decades in northern bobwhite, closely tracking declines with the loggerhead shrike. Now this resulted in other people coming up with some other similar charts for other species, such as the eastern meadowlark and some others. But this was kind of the first one. Any guesses what the point was that people were often trying to make when they showed this chart?
relation of habitat.
That's it. Yeah. They were trying to say, you think that quail are going down because of predation of quail nests on the ground? You think they're going down because of overhunting? Well, look at this. Yeah, and they have a very similar habitat that they used, although different nesting conditions. And so this shows. Now, does that prove that it's habitat? No, it's correlation. It shows correlation, not causation. But it's a very strong correlation. Quail, northern bobwhite, have been declining about 3% per year for the past several decades. We have been very frustrated with quail declines for several decades. I mentioned this the other day. Trying to figure out what the deal was. Is it habitat? Because we've got some great habitat on the ground where the quail aren't responding, or is it predation? Is it other things? And we finally have figured it out. It is habitat. There are other factors that play in, but it is habitat that's the issue. Here's another chart. It shows down low the red and blue are field sparrow and grasshopper sparrow. So their numbers were also low, not declining quite as precipitously, but still declining. Most bird species in North America have been declining on average 2% per year for the past 50, 55, 60 years at least, since we've been monitoring them very well. But we see it again with the purple and green, the northern bobwhite and the eastern meadowlark. That decline tracks very closely. And the more we see this relationship, the more we feel pretty confident that this is a habitat. It's a habitat issue. So, as we have tried to figure out what to do with quail, how to manage quail throughout their range in the eastern U.S., mostly the southeastern U.S. Back in the 1980s, our focus was on trying to replace the pastures that we planted with Kentucky 31 tall fescue, which grows, as you know, in a dense mat those little birds can't get through, with native warm season grasses. And since most of our lands that have good quail habitat, early successional habitat in the southeast are private lands, we were trying to do it with incentive programs. And the main incentive program that we had that was very well funded was the Conservation Reserve Program. Now I'll talk a little bit more soon. We've talked about this a little bit. We've referenced it here and there. No, I'm sorry, I'm getting this mixed up with other classes, yeah. The Conservation Reserve Program, I think, is there anybody here who doesn't know what that is? I think everybody here knows what that is. I know all you wildlife guys do. Brown, you know conservation? Okay, all right. So landowners can choose different conservation practices, okay? And we call those CP, conservation practice, and there's dozens that they can choose from. But a very common one that we're using in the 1990s and early 2000s, and we're still using it today, is Conservation Practice 33, which is field borders for bobwhites. When, I mentioned this before, I think, when the Conservation Reserve Program first started, landowners were putting entire fields into CRP. So there might be a 10, 20, 30 acre field here. There might be 10 miles away, another 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 acre field. 20 miles away, another one. And what we found is well, that's great, but 5 acres of perfect quail habitat surrounded by nothing but row crops doesn't do you any good. And they don't necessarily need that full 30 acres or whatever that field is. So what we started doing was, instead of paying for all that area right here, we started saying, let's just encourage farmers to put a field edge, a field border, maybe a couple field borders into native warm season grasses. And then you got another farm here with a border and another border here and another border here, and you start having connectivity. And instead of paying a whole lot of money for that, that money can stretch out a lot farther. And we started seeing a lot more connectivity of habitats, allowing those meta-population dynamics to work. Okay, that's good. That's getting more bang for our buck when it comes to Conservation Reserve Program. We have some other conservation practices we're using now, and I won't get into all of them, but I'll come back to how we're trying to figure out how much is enough to get quail back. Because even when we were doing that, a lot of the times it wasn't enough. Quail still weren't responding. Now, a lot of the range of northern bobwhite is south of us, down here in the Gulf Coastal Plain and South Atlantic coast, okay? What type of habitat do you think of in this part of the world? Yeah, a lot of pine savannas. There we go, yeah, so you have southern pine habitats, and where they're growing dense monocultures, it's no good for quail, but where we're restoring savannas with wiregrass and such underneath, like for red cockaded woodpecker, quail were benefiting. So this was a situation where management for an endangered species was benefiting our native species. People have continued to argue, hunters have continued to argue, it's gotta be the predators, But please tell me, some of you know my response to this. If you kill coyotes to help quail, what might happen?
Other species come in, other
Yeah.
predators come in.
Yeah. First of all, they're gonna come right back, but if you do manage to hold them down, what might happen? You've released, like some of you are saying. What are some other quail nest predators that you might release? Raccoons, skunks, maybe possums,
Bobcats, maybe.
maybe black rat snakes, rats even, right? Lots of other predators. So, if we're really trying to intensively restore a species, then broad spectrum predator control of all those other species could work for a little while, but it's very expensive and time consuming. And quail are adapted to these predators if they have good habitat. So why would you spend all that money? It's a waste. Just put the habitat out. Has anybody has anybody heard of or been to Ames Plantation, a couple hours south of us here in Southwest Tennessee? Okay, Ames Plantation was the home of a family, the Ames family, Hobart Ames, of wealthy Old South Plantation quail hunters. And it became the home of the National Bird Dog Field Trials. And these are people come from all over the world to participate in these field trials. Ames Plantation became, for a good while, an experiment station of UT, a UT field experiment station. And they did a lot of research, still do a lot of research on agricultural practices, but also habitat management for quail. And they became frustrated after decades and decades of declining bird numbers that they felt they were managing habitat optimally for northern bobwhite, and they had thousands of acres. And with 20,000 acres, 25,000 acres, and bobwhite population still not going up, they're like, it can't be habitat. But biologists came in, and does anybody know how hunters are transported at the National Bird Dog Field Trial? Any guesses? Horseback. Okay. So what type of dog does it take to stay in front of horses hunting quail? Very fast dogs. Okay. Right. They were managing these habitats for these very fast dogs for these horses, and it really wasn't very classic native habitat for quail. So about 10 years or so ago, I forget exactly what year, Ames had always been very proud that their birds were wild birds. They were not pen-reared birds. They finally went to pen-reared birds because the hunters were just so frustrated. So that was a big blow to the quail community about 10 years ago in the Southeast, who thought, we know how to grow quail, we know how to put the habitat on the ground, but we don't always do it for reasons that we don't always think of. You can understand that reason, but who would have thought horses and fast dogs, how does that play into habitat?
Are you saying they were killing them too fast that way?
No, I forget all the characteristics. One of the things is, first of all, the birds, the dogs were being trained on pen-raised birds in other places. And pen-raised birds are stupid. Native birds are very wary. And these pen-raised dogs running hard would go right past these these native birds and never see them. They were also keeping the vegetation mown really short so that these fast-moving hunters and fast-moving dogs, so the hunters could see their dogs. So there wasn't a lot of that higher cover that you would typically see in classic quail habitat. So it was shorter cover, and these dogs were being trained to very easily find a bird that's just sitting out there in the middle of nowhere looking at them like an idiot, right?
I haven't been on the plantation, but I drove past it, and it looks like an orchard almost. It's like low grass,
yeah,
trees scattered.
Yeah, and there is some really good habitat, and they burn regularly and stuff, but they keep it short for those horses. Yeah.
Do you think there was, because it's right down the road from Wolf River, do you think there was a lot of like crossover between coyotes from moving from Wolf River to there, or like moving from private land to public land, or do you think they kind of stayed on their own?
That's a really good question. I haven't really spent time there since last time I was there. Wolf River wasn't a focal area, and I'm going to come talk about that a little bit more here in just a little bit. But they are real close together. Yeah. So I don't know. That's a good question. What the classic golden number that we're looking for good quail numbers is a bird an acre on average. So if you've got a 100-acre farm, 100 birds, and that's something that most people around here have never seen or heard of before. But historically, that's what it was often like. So biologists were frustrated. All the quail biologists in the states in the Southeast formed a group, and they met for decades, called the Southeastern Quail Study Group, SCQSG. in the Southeastern Quail Study Group, these biologists, they talked and they're like, we know it's habitat, and if you can put the habitat on the ground, you won't always get your quail. But if you don't have optimal habitat on the ground, you will never get your quail. And sometimes when you have the habitat, you will. So it's got to be habitat. So they decided, look, let's pull our resources, let's pull together all this research. We've been studying, this has been one of the most studied species for the past century in the eastern United States. Let's pull it all together we know, and let's come up with a daggum plan. So they formed the NBCI. It was originally called the Northern Bobwhite Conservation Initiative, because the common name of the species is the Northern Bobwhite. But nobody was used to using that common name because it was always quail. So everybody thought that it was an initiative for the northern part of its range. So they changed it to the National Bobwhite Conservation Initiative. So it's the NBCI was formed, a report back around, I think, 2002, that had hard goals for each state to try to restore quail. So it's kind of their answer to the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, which had hard goals. This had very hard goals. So this is from that original NBCI, and it shows, according to state quail biologists and WMA managers, where is the land in each state that has the highest potential for quail. And a lot of that was based on where did we historically have the highest numbers of quail, okay? So blue is best, orange is second best, green is not so good, and black is, cities. And so if you look at Tennessee, where's the biggest patch of blue? We're in it, right here, and going south of us to Jackson, right? How much intensive quail habitat management are you aware of between here and Jackson? Hardly any, right? What's going on instead of intensive quail habitat management between here and Jackson? Row crops. Yeah, this is the most fertile soil in the state around here, right? So it's hard to compete with financial incentive for land management. So where we've ended up putting quail is not where was historically the very best place. And that's just because of economics, okay? Now, I don't want to belabor this. I show you this, and I'm going to show you another one of these in a minute. This is from an excerpt from that original National Bobwhite Conservation Initiative. I just want to show you some of these hard numbers that they had, okay? So this says, state summary of biologist ranking information summarized by habitat type for areas ranked high and moderate, and then they didn't include low, with associated number of cubbies predicted to be added to current population levels. Cubbies added are considered potentials without a time scale where potential is dependent on realizing the habitat management goals is stipulated in the NBCI. Cubbies added depict crude estimates of population targets for states and can be viewed properly as hypotheses to be tested. So what we looked at is, okay, this was the result of a lot of work, a lot of research, a lot of cubby counts, a lot of looking at historical records. So in Tennessee, for example, we, without getting too far into the weeds, specifically the weeds, row crops, the area that had high potential for quail, we thought we could add 1,127 cubbies. Medium, 600. I don't know what range is, rangeland. I don't know how that's different from pasture. Rangeland is out west. I'm not sure about that. Hardwood, 2,000 for the good stuff, 5,400 for the medium stuff. Mixed forest, pasture, upland pine, not much because Tennessee doesn't have much upland pine, but you get farther south, that's a bigger number. Cubbies added, 45,000 and 120,000 in medium. So 165,000 or so cubbies. We felt and hoped that we could add across the state if we could optimize those habitat, quail habitat in each one of those different types of ecosystems in the state. So we had very hard numbers, okay? Don't worry about memorizing any of these numbers. I want you to understand the idea. We had hard numbers. If you look specifically, remember this, does this look familiar to you, right? Partners in Flight, bird conservation regions. Remember this one here, Tennessee has the Appalachian, the Central Hardwoods, the Gulf Coast, right? And then the Mississippi Alluvial Valley. that Gulf Coast right there in West Tennessee, that's where we are, and that's that prime quail area, right? So let's take that. This is Bird Conservation Region number 27, this one where we are. Across all of the states, proposed estimated density, managed density, and potential coveys added for all bird conservation regions. This is Bird Conservation Region 27, the Gulf Coastal Plain. Row crop, rangeland, hardwood, mixed forest, pasture, upland pine. We thought that and hoped, our goal was to add 860,000 coveys in that bird conservation region across all the states where it occurs by optimizing the habitat. So we had very specific goals from that Northern Bobwhite Conservation Initiative. Here's, again, the southeastern coastal plain, Bird Conservation Region number 27. Biologists rank, and this is kind of looking a little bit more closely at that map I showed you earlier. Biologists said that 27% of it, of that whole region, was considered high potential for quail, based largely on what it used to be on its past. 29% medium, 35% low, 9% that's urban areas had no potential at all. And here in Tennessee, there was a lot of potential here. And so we were, in that plan, we were basing our goals largely on our history. And it was kind of doomed to fail because we were operating against financial incentive to row crop it, right? So this is what that plan recognized as major land use opportunities. How can we put more coveys on the ground in each of these? So forest management, where you have woodlands or savannas, in Bird Conservation Region 29, the southeastern coastal plain. This is not just Tennessee. That was huge, about 24%. Prescribed burning. If we could implement more prescribed burning on the ground, that we could optimize habitat for a lot of quail. Field borders and farm field management. So using CRP, CP33, CRP, we could put a bunch of coveys on the ground. Restoration to native longleaf pine, that's not in Tennessee, that's farther south of us, but that had a lot of potential, getting rid of those dense pine monocultures and open it up to pine savanna, right? Existing quail habitat conservation areas, okay, just keep what we have, don't let those go down. Conversion of pastures to native warm season grass, a little bit. So this is kind of where we were wanting to focus. Where do we have the greatest potential to put more coveys on the ground? What types of practices can we do? And these are what we saw as the main constraints to success. Economics, and that's, if row crops are making money and somebody's livelihood depends on it, you can't ask them to turn a 1,000-acre farm into quail habitat. That's unrealistic, right? Intensive farming related to economics, and that economics could be other things too, just the expense of managing for quail, right? Sod forming grasses, tall fescue. Low adoption rate. Yeah, I want to do it, but I don't. I don't get around to it, right? So people have good intentions, but they don't follow through. Difficulty of using fire. A lot of people are scared of fire. They're unfamiliar with fire. They try it and it doesn't work very well for them. Current or future urbanization. The Southeast has been growing dramatically, right? Small farm landholding size. You might have a whole bunch of people that have a little 20, 30 acre property like I have, but 20 or 30 acres doesn't do it if it's not connected to 1,000 or 10,000 good acres. So about the size of the property. Inappropriate vegetation cover types, limited financial assistance of programs, and industrial forest ownership where they're saying, forget it, we're just managing for trees and money. So these are the big constraints. Money was the big one.
So did they go back and analyze those constraints after they kind of like put in place of the plan, like after the plan was put in place, or were they these things that they like expected?
They expected these. They already knew these were constraints that were working against them. So it was with a plan. So then we implemented it in 2002, right? And all the states said, okay, here's your marching orders. Here's what you need to do. Here's the constraints you face. Here's your opportunities. here's how many coveys we're gonna hope you're gonna put on the ground, and here's how we hope you're gonna do it. And the state small game biologists were just overwhelmed. You know, they were trying to work with the WMA managers, they were trying to work with the NRCS and farmers, but it was just overwhelming. It was just too much. There's like, yeah, we know how to do it, but it's just too much. We just can't do it. So we came up with NBCI Deuce, version 2, okay? And in version 2 that came out, I forget when, 2012, 2018, somewhere in there, several years later. They decided that what we need to do is show some models that we had seen in that first decade or so of the plan. There were places where it was working. It just wasn't working statewide. So if we, and guys, I think this is on Canvas if I go too fast for you. Okay, it is on Canvas. Sorry. So we said, let's have each state come up with a few places, and we're going to focus our efforts there. We're going to call them focal areas, okay? Tennessee, we were originally going to have one in each of our TWRA regions, so there would be 4. For whatever reason, they have 5, and I'll show you them now. So we call this the Coordinated Implementation Program, the CIP, for the focal areas. And the minimum standards of the focal areas is this. This first bullet is the important one, and you might well see that first bullet on the next test. You hear me? You might very well see that first bullet on the next test. So think about this. They say what we need for a focal area is at least 1,500 acres of year-round quail habitat that comprises at least 25% of an area. So that could mean that you've got 6,000 acres that includes 1,500 acres, that's 1/4 of it, of good quail habitat. So what does that look like across the landscape? Instead of 5 acres here, 20 acres there, 40 acres here, now you've got 6,000 acres with 25% of it scattered throughout a good quail habitat, wherever it is. It doesn't matter where, just so you've got 25% of it is good quail habitat. What does this create the opportunity for? And I'm looking for 2 words.
Early successional habitat?
Well, you're creating early successional habitat in patches.
Fragmentation.
Fragmentation's a bad word.
The biology, the island
Metapopulation dynamics, right? And this is how quail survive, right? You get one year it's a shitty year for quail, and maybe you lose half your cubbies. How do you get them back? You get them back from the other cubbies that you don't lose, right? So this is a pretty good idea. Now, it could be that you got 1,500 acres. That's all good. Maybe you've only got this much, and 100% of it's good quail habitat. That works. Or maybe you've got 3,000 acres and half of it's good quail habitat. That works. But that's what we're starting with right there. And what they said is, okay, we need you to monitor. Let's be sure we're collecting enough data to see if it works. So they have to do annual breeding bird population, point count transects on the focal areas, and also on other areas nearby that are not focal areas, we call reference areas. So we have something to compare the focal areas to, because the focal area, the populations are going up. How do we know it's because of our good habitat management? We have to compare it to somewhere where we're not doing that management to say it's going up here and it's not going up there. Good, our management is working, right? Annual fall covey count point transects on focal areas every fall. Okay, what are those populations doing? Periodic habitat assessment transects. We say we're putting the habitat on the ground. Are we? Let's be sure we are. Annual habitat management tracking on both focal and reference areas. So we're looking at both the population changes on the focal and the reference areas and changes in the vegetation. It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Right? What do you think? Has it worked? Has anybody heard? Have these worked? There they are, by the way. In West Tennessee in Region 1, our quail focal area is on the Wolf River Wildlife Management Area. Brandon Gilbert is one of our graduates, and he's the manager of that area. And since MBCI 2 came out, he's been managing that area for quail. And it's interesting because it's a bottomland. It's a bottomland, but they're able to manage it for quail. Yeah.
I was gonna ask, the hot spot for the state that was like originally in, I guess like the 1.0, like the original plan was West Tennessee. So why is there these focal areas, why are they in? Is it because of ag?
Largely because of, I mean, why is this down here and not up in here in that magic zone?
Yeah,
Because of
it's like
ag,
4 on the
right?
opposite sides
And
of the river.
what's, not only that, but where we were seeing after MBCI first came out, and some where we had managers that were having some of the best success was in Middle and East Tennessee. The two places in particular, one was Kiker Bottoms over in East Tennessee. The manager, he's retired now, Bill, I forget Bill's last name, but that had been a Bottoms. It was waterfowl management. He started putting quail habitat on the ground, and quail responded beautifully to it. And the other place was on the Bridgestone Firestone, on the Cumberland Plateau, right here, Bridgestone Firestone Wildlife Management Area. So up here is Crossville. There's the interstate. Bridgestone Firestone, south of the interstate. It's above Fall Creek Falls down here. So Bridgestone Firestone was a big chunk of land donated to TWRA by Bridgestone Firestone. And they originally put in 500 acres of native warm season grass. Now this was kind of early. We were still developing our understanding of what made good quail habitat. And this was during a period when everybody was jumping on board the native warm season grass bandwagon. Get rid of the fescue, plant native warm season grass, and everything will be peachy. We know now that you gotta have native warm season grass associations, but you also need shrub associations, brushy covey headquarter areas. And for the first several years, we saw phenomenal rabbit populations, but quail were doing okay, especially around the edges. But there wasn't enough shrubby stuff. But they've gotten a whole lot better, and their quail numbers are doing very well now. Yeah.
I think they were working because, like, when I worked at Wolf River last summer, I've never been anywhere where I can consistently hear quail like just all day.
Yeah.
And I think you said Brandon had said they had over a dozen cubs they know of.
I think was it 15 or 16 cubbies that he thought he had this summer? Yeah.
When we were down there, the graduate student Ellie, who was doing the quail project, she bounced around between all these areas, and she said Bridgestone Firestone was her most active site. She said there was more quail there than any of the other ones she was at.
And that's happened in the last 20 years since they started putting those, the cutting up that grass.
Yeah, and I've hunted up there quite a bit, and a lot of it is really good habitat as well.
Yeah. Another place that has great quail habitat a little bit closer to us.
Tumbleweed.
What's that?
Tumbleweed's got some.
Yeah, tumbleweeds, okay. Great rabbits, okay, quail. It's on the Tennessee-Kentucky border, and more of it's in Kentucky, really.
LBL.
Fort Campbell. Why, Jake? Why is Fort Campbell? What's that?
Military land.
Yeah, so?
It's good,
Can I quote what you said one time?
What's that?
They're blowing shit up a lot.
and most of the land's not really used by, like, people aren't on it, and then just heavy disturbance from
Right.
artillery.
Heavy disturbance, a lot of fire, no fescue ever planted on it, so optimal. Thank you for your service, and for your land. Yeah. So if we can,
That says the same thing.
if we can take this model, if there comes a tipping point when we decide, okay, local areas work, that works. Let's take that model. And what they're hoping is going to happen, of course, is that adjacent landowners, nearby landowners see this and they start buying, they drink the Kool-Aid and they start adding their land, and that can extend out, get bigger and bigger, right? And if we can take that model and say, okay, you know, sure enough, this works, maybe we'll figure out some kinks. Well, you don't have to do this, we need to do more of that, this is what's working, and start applying it in other places. We're not gonna have quail across Tennessee like we used to, but can we have good, healthy, sustainable populations, maybe even a bird an acre in half a dozen places, a dozen places, 2 dozen, 4 dozen, several places across the state? Maybe we can. Okay, so this is really interesting. This is experimental science. This is, what's the term? It's adaptive management that we're doing here, and we're learning as we go. Yeah.
Kind of tying into the harvest management stuff. I know all these areas you can't hunt quail at them. Like a lot of them you can run dogs and stuff and train them, but why don't they make the regular quail season a little more restricted? Because like you said, a lot of these areas have reference sites around them where the quail season is still wide open on them, whatever the regulations are. I don't know exactly, but.
Have I told y'all the story of the quail regulations in Tennessee? Okay. So quail are our selected species. And what's the general idea about our selected species and hunting mortality? It is supposed to be compensatory. That's right. Okay. But when you get a population that's getting really, really low, and there's only a few places where they are, and the people who like to hunt quail really hammer those places pretty hard because there's nowhere else to go, is it possible that you could be starting to achieve additive mortality at times and places? Maybe. Early season hunting, probably not. Late season hunting, like into February, it could be that some of that was additive. So several years ago, and this would have been maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, the state biologists put a proposal to the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission to shorten the quail season at the tail end by 2 weeks, to cut it off January 31 instead of February 15 or whatever that was. Who do you think came out of the woodwork against that? But let me back. Quail hunters. And now tell me this. And this is, I don't know if it's a trick question, but it's a tricky question. Where are most quail hunters finding their quail these days? They're growing their own. They're growing their own quail. A lot of quail hunters are growing their own quail and putting them out. And most quail hunters hunt quail with what? With dogs. They're really into their dogs, training their dogs. So what do you think that quail hunters thought about this idea of shortening the season? We don't need to shorten the season. We've got our own birds. That's not gonna make any difference for our birds. And you're giving us less time. It's that late season that we really enjoy running our dogs for these birds. We don't want to do it. So they went to the commissioners and said, no, that's, native birds, it's history. It's not gonna happen. The future is in pen-reared birds, so just let us keep it. So TWRA said they said let us keep a long season. So TWRA said, what about this? What about instead of ending the season February 15th and starting it November 15th or whatever, we just move the whole season up from November 1 to February 1 or something like that. So add two weeks to the front of the season to compensate those 2 weeks at the back, right? The commission, that included a lot of friends of bird hunters and a few bird hunters too, said, oh yeah, bird hunters, we hear you. So we're gonna keep the end of the season February 15. Biologists, we hear you. So we're gonna move the front of the season up 2 weeks as well. So instead of shortening it, they gave us 2 extra weeks. And it's 2 weeks longer than it was now. So that's the disadvantage of being at the mercy of a commission who's
Has no educational background at all.
and a lot of the time these commissioners are very wealthy, successful individuals who are not biologists, but when you're wealthy and successful, you probably got there by being really confident, having a lot of self-confidence. And what is this biologist, what can they teach me that I don't already know, right? So it's a challenge, yeah.
Has there been any changes over harvest limits over the years? Because I think the limit's like 10 or 15 days or something.
I don't remember, but again, I think that very few hunters get that. And since they are primarily are selected and mortality is usually compensatory, I don't think that there was much pressure there to change the numbers, because it's like deer, three does a day. Nobody's shooting that. But if there's some honcho out there who does, more power to them. They're probably not going to change too much.
On places like Ames, for instance, where there might be overlap between native and pin-reared birds, is there any breeding interactions between the two, or the pin-reared kind of stick to their own?
Very, very low. Pin-reared birds have horrible survival. They don't.
Right.
They don't live long at all, and we hope that there's not much interaction between the two. Because, we used to hope that, but we've given up because we don't want them to spread any diseases to our native birds.
Yeah.
And another thing is, pin-reared birds. You put them out, these stupid birds on the landscape. Lots of them for the hunters, and what are you attracting? Avian predators, right? And those avian predators, as long as they're taking off the stupid pin-reared ones, they might take a couple native ones while they're at it. So that can actually do more harm than good.
Stupid birds.
So yeah,
I just love
it's
the way that,
it's not their fault, but yeah, they're stupid.
I get in trouble when I say that about.
So the Wolf River Focal Area has a little over 3,000 acres. They've got 13 monitoring points. They've been collecting this data formally required by MBCI 2.0 since 2018. We'll see how it goes, but we're in the middle of kind of a new way of looking at quail management in Tennessee, and that's building on this model of focal areas, and it's looking pretty good, right? We know it's working. We know how to grow quail. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of land, but we can do it.
So is that strategic plan just basically like Tennessee's response to the NBCI 2.0 kind of deal? Like what their plan
Largely,
is to respond
there's
to
more
it?
to it than that, but
Okay.
that's largely how we're implementing MBCI 2.0 and what we see for our future out beyond just mobilizing these focal units. What comes next? Feel free to take a look. It's online. All right, let's switch gears. Let's go out west. What kind of habitat does that look like to you? Chaparral, good, yeah. Shrub steppe habitat. We're talking about upland game birds. What kind of upland game birds do you think might use that type of habitat?
Pheasants. Well, actually.
You're talking about exotic species?
Grouse?
Huh? Grouse? Maybe some.
Well, they use it in Washington when I was out there.
Yeah. What else? What's going to use this type of habitat a lot? This is in the Southwest, this particular habitat.
Quail.
Yeah, quail. This is a lot what the habitat of a lot of western quail species looks like. That chaparral habitat that we talked about. This could be grouse too. Wyoming big sage. This is not Wyoming big sage, but that's somewhat what it looks like. Sagebrush interspersed with grasses and forbs. But this is classic quail habitat in the southeast. What's one of the primary limitations on wildlife in the southwest? I said southeast, I meant southwest. What's one of water? That's right. What are these?
Wells.
Water now.
Different types of water facilities, which for many decades we put these in for quail and prairie grouse in a lot of western states on public lands, and they became collectively known by a jargon term. Does anybody know what it is? Gallinaceous guzzlers is what they called them.
Sure.
Gallinaceous
You said that was
guzzlers.
the jargon term?
Huh?
You said, what was that? The what term?
The jargon term?
Negative.
Is that gonna be on the tab?
Spell that.
Yeah. Gallinaceous game birds. What is?
California.
Yeah, galliforms. Yeah. So game birds in the Galliformes order, which is the chicken-like birds. Gallinaceous. Gallinaceous guzzlers.
Good.
I think that was a
Super
couple
gallinaceous.
a couple good old boys drinking beer one Friday afternoon came up with that, I guess. But so they come in all sorts. Okay, so here is this collects rainfall and has a pipe that runs to this pool. This one has an underground sink. Many of them, they're often shaded to keep the water cool and from evaporating, so animals can go in.
Some of them, so only small animals can go in and not large animals like cattle or livestock. There's a lot of different types. And I think your reading provides you with a lot of different examples of natural water and artificial water. My study area in northeastern Oregon was pine and Douglas fir it was mountainous ridges, okay, and on the north slopes of these ridges, pine and Douglas fir. On the south slopes, it was bunch grass. So there was forest, but there was a lot of kind of arid grassland, shrubland habitat. And where those grasses were on these slopes, every now and then there'd be just a spring, just a little trickle of water coming down. And every single spring had a fence around it. And a lot of those fences might be a fenced area about the size of this classroom, and then a pipe coming out of the spring with a water trough on the downhill side for cattle. But the wildlife could jump over the fence and have good habitat and cover while they were drinking and seeking shelter and such. So water is intensively managed in the arid west, and it's certainly managed for quail and prairie grouse.
Did you say, so the gallinaceous guzzlers term refers to quail and what else? Or is it just quail?
Galliforms, yeah, quail, yeah, I mean, some prairie grouse as well, you know, in those habitats, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Any guesses? I kind of alluded to this Tuesday. What's that?
Roosting turkeys.
Yeah, this is a roosting tower for turkeys in the southwestern region, where it was determined that roosting habitat was the limiting factor for turkeys. And this actually increased carrying capacity in some regions. Really got to police those to be sure the poachers don't, because it's pretty easy to find your birds. You know where those are. Okay, let's come back to the southeastern turkeys. I told you I was going to talk a little bit about the history of turkeys in Tennessee. So in the 1970, Southeastern Wildlife Agency's estimated abundance of turkeys. What we had in Tennessee was a little bit in the Appalachians and the Cumberland Plateau, okay, medium to low populations. Low populations on the Mississippi River, okay? Low everywhere except right there on the, primarily Alabama, right there on the Mississippi line in central Alabama, where they had really nice populations for whatever reason, okay? I don't know, but they had plenty of them there. There was actually pretty good populations up here in Missouri, but that's not in the southeast, so not in that study. By 1996, looked a little bit different, okay? Alabama, Mississippi still had plenty of birds. A lot of other states, their numbers had gone up. Tennessee, let's go back, look at Tennessee, 1970, 1996, all right? Not much had changed in West Tennessee, right? But when you get to Middle Tennessee, you started seeing a lot more birds. How did the numbers go up so much? Yeah. We figured out how to use rocket nets to trap a bunch of turkeys at once. And state wildlife agencies, with the help of National Wild Turkey Federation, started trapping them and moving like crazy. Tennessee trapped and moved about 10,000 birds over the course of about 20-25 years. Now those birds were being trapped and moved regionally. Each region had their own, they kind of had authority to do things how they wanted to. So there wasn't a whole lot going on over here in East Tennessee. There was a little bit, but a lot of the birds that were coming into the state, for Middle Tennessee, a lot of them were coming by way of Missouri. There was a healthy population in Missouri. A lot of those birds were being taken into the land between the lakes area. And so Middle Tennessee, at the time, the Region 2 manager was a man named Larry Mngmt. Larry died about 10 years ago. But there's a waterfowl photograph on the hall between here and my office on the left. That was in his living room. So Larry was an avid turkey hunter and really wanted a lot of turkeys. So he had his people trapping and moving turkeys into Middle Tennessee like crazy. And
as it turned out, Middle Tennessee has really good turkey habitat. Fragmented is not the word I would use, but interspersed is. A lot of forests, a lot of pastures, some row crops, a lot of, field edges and stuff. Really good turkey, interspersed turkey habitat. West Tennessee doesn't have such good habitat. We have a whole lot of row crops, right? So a lot more limited potential. Where are the forests in West Tennessee? Down in the annual floodplain, a whole lot of them. And when it comes to nesting habitat, turkey builds a nest in the annual floodplain, gets flooded out, so it's not optimal. But our birds were coming from that Alabama population up through the Anderson-Tully Wildlife Management Area of West Tennessee and dispersed throughout the rest of the state. The manager during those years was Harold Hurst. I think Harold's still alive, but he's been retired for probably 20, 25 years, several years now. And he was not as much of a turkey enthusiast as Larry McGinn. So he didn't work his people quite as hard, and I think he probably recognized too that our habitat has more limitations. So we brought plenty of turkeys into West Tennessee, but not as many, with not as quite as high a hope. But that to me, that kind of tells another story too, is that Eugene Schifflin, we can thank one doofus for European starlings in the United States. Larry McGinn and Harold Hurst, we can thank two personalities largely for the abundance of turkeys we have. There would have been other people in there trapping turkeys if not them, but the personal values and proclivities of an individual can have a big influence on, decades later, population density is a really important species. So what we saw from those early years when we first started trapping and moving turkeys was a dramatic increase in turkey populations, especially in Middle Tennessee. We're seeing this statewide. They're going up in West Tennessee slowly, not maybe a little bit on the plateau in East Tennessee, but they were kind of limited because there was a whole lot of forest in a lot of that area. But in Middle Tennessee, they were exploding. How many of you experienced that turkey explosion in Middle Tennessee? Logan, you did. Kate, you did. I did too. Yeah. There was a flock in Davidson County, Nashville, a physical flock of 1,000 birds in one place, standing in a field together in one place. I frequently saw 200 to 300 birds in flocks, and you don't see that as much anymore, right? And a lot of people today, young people today, who remember those years in the 90s and early 2000s, and go, turkeys, it's not like it used to be. But what we had right here was really not natural. We were moving thousands of birds in. Before those birds had kind of habituated, before predators had figured out how to capitalize on them, they were forming these unnaturally large flocks, and were doing really, really well for a while. And so what we have today is probably a lot more normal, a lot more natural. So you hear a lot of people in central Tennessee complaining that the turkey population is falling. We've got real problems. It's dropping a little bit. We're not sure how much, but it's actually doing pretty good. The turkey population is pretty good. It's just not as good as it was right there. Yeah.
If that's the case, why did like organizations such as like TFT start forming and things like that?
Like who?
Like Turkeys for Tomorrow and stuff like that. They were all freaking out that we were losing our birds.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a turkey nurse. I don't care.
Right.
Props to them.
Right. Boy, the politics of non-governmental organizations are complex. And I'll get into that when I talk about grouse in a few minutes. Before there was Quail I'm going to talk for Quail for a second before I get to turkeys. Before there was Quail Forever, there was Quail Unlimited. And Quail Unlimited was a huge, very popular group when quail were doing pretty well back in the 1960s and 70s. But when quail crashed and dropped, and there was decades and we couldn't figure out what to do about it, and we were foundering, Quail Unlimited went under. But they got their population got taken by Quail Forever as there was a New Hope. What's that Star Wars movie, New Hope? There was a New Hope that the NBCI could bring quail back. So that gave these quail lovers something to glom onto. Okay, here's a new organization I can join, and let's see if it'll do good. So Quail Unlimited was successful because there was a lot of quail. Quail Forever is successful because there's potential to bring back quail. National Wild Turkey Federation exploded pretty much right along with the turkey population. Turkeys are coming back, and everybody was joining like crazy, right? And turkeys are still pretty good. There's enough turkey hunters to want to join an organization. So Turkeys for Tomorrow is saying to get hunters. Okay, I'm not saying that they're saying this, but an organization could do this. They could say, we've got a crisis. Turkeys are declining. Join us, give us your money so we can pay to do research to save your turkeys. Right? A lot of organizations do that. And I'll give examples of how that's been done with regard to timber harvest and rough grouse in East Tennessee.
Didn't WTF take a lot of credit for reestablishing turkeys too?
They do, yeah. And that's that's the nature of NGOs. They live or die by membership dues. So they got to say, this is what your money got. Your money got you turkeys in Tennessee. We did that, right? And the state biologists are like, what are we, chopped liver? We were the ones doing it, right? But Turkey Federation played a part. Their money went for research. Their money bought all the boxes, all the tens of thousands of boxes that all the states were using to move turkeys. Their volunteers were helping biologists move turkeys. So, they played a big part. But NGOs are going to say, look at what we did. That's how they get members. I don't know why I'm showing you that. I think I already showed you something similar. This is history. This only goes to 2011. The numbers, are kind of wiggly, a little bit down, but not too far. They're still pretty good. And Roger's going to talk about current day. All right, let's talk about rough grouse. In the western United States, rough grouse are frequently found in moist, dense creek bottoms where you have an aspen component that tends to be more dry, arid regions. In the northern United States, and we're talking about the Northeast. So this area here is kind of the center of the rough grouse range. That's great rough grouse range up there. How many times do I have to circle it? And aspen is what it's all about. So young regenerating aspen forests. There's a lot of public land. If you go to Minnesota, for example, a whole lot of public land. And the state wildlife, now here's an advantage of the state wildlife agency being in the same state department as their division of forestry. They work very closely together. Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency and Tennessee Division of Forestry and Tennessee State Parks none of them are in the same department, right? Tennessee Division of Forestry is in Department of Ag. State Parks is in TDEC. TWRA is independent. An advantage of agencies being in the same department is there's perhaps more potential or incentive for them to partner more closely on some things. Now, not to say that TWRA doesn't partner with these other agencies, they do. But you go up to Minnesota and the Wildlife Agency and the Forestry Division are hand in hand managing those populations for forests and for rough grouse. Rough grouse up in that part of their range, I think I mentioned a couple days ago, they cycle on about a 10-year cycle. And I know probably 24 people I know here in Tennessee who go up there 2 or 3 years in a row when the birds are at the top of their cycle, and they won't go again for 7 or 8 more years. And then they go 2 or 3 years in a row, and then they wait. They go 2 or 3 years in a row. And there's thousands of people doing that from all over the place. that adds a lot of money to those state economies, a lot of revenue to those state wildlife agencies. So that's really powerful stuff, right? What do they call that young regenerating aspen up there? Anybody remember? Popple. Popple. We're gonna go hunt the popple, don't you know? Oh, yeah. But here in the southeastern United States, we don't have aspen, those are the male catkins, right? We have forests and we have young regenerating clear cuts. This is on my study area on the Cherokee National Forest. And that's about a 1 or 2 year old clear cut. Let that become a 5 to 15 year old clear cut, and it becomes more dense, and that's where those birds came from. So if you have a mosaic of clear cuts on a forest, and you've got young regenerating ones, you know, scattered throughout that, does that look a little bit like that, right? Metapopulation dynamics. Those birds, those young birds disperse amongst those clear cuts. Now, let me back up a little bit before I get into politics here. 200-300 years ago, the Cherokee National Forest did not look like that. Why do we have to have clear cuts if ruffed grouse evolved without them?
Natural disasters came in and cleared it for them.
Do we still have natural disasters? So what made natural disasters more effective then, and what else complemented natural disasters then that maybe that's different in our forest today?
Fire.
Climate change?
Huh?
Climate change? I guess that's kind of old growth.
What about old growth?
Growth forest.
What about old growth?
Uneven aged.
Uneven age forests, yeah.
See the results of the natural disaster.
That's right, that's right. So how old would you say these forests are, these highly managed forests? Not the clear-cut ones, but these that are not clear-cut.
60 to 80.
Yeah, they're gonna be harvested at about 80 years or so, right? Give or take a couple decades. So these are young, even-age stands, right? And a young, vigorous, even-age stand is gonna be pretty robust and healthy to things like wind throw and that sort of thing. But when you get a forest that becomes 150, 200, 300 years old, it becomes uneven aged, you have trees dropping. So instead of having a patch of habitat here, a patch of habitat here, a patch of habitat here, you've got early successional patches all throughout it, a bunch of little bitty ones, a few medium-sized ones, and every now and then a great big one, right? So we're simulating that natural early successional mosaic, that shifting steady state with clear cuts. That's okay, that allows us to get forest products out of it. It's not quite what they're adapted to, it's not quite as good, right? Now, somebody did mention climate change, and the range of ruffed grouse, yeah, don't have it, is mostly up there, but it comes down in the Appalachian Mountains into East Tennessee, a little bit on the Cumberland Plateau, and North Georgia, right? And those populations here in the southern Appalachians have been gradually declining over the last few decades, right? This is a cold weather adapted species. This is a more northern species. We should anticipate that climate change is going to result in their gradual range reduction, right? Just as easing back up northward as the winters become warmer, the summers become hotter. Instead, we'll get armadillos and fire ants, right? And we'll lose those northern species like ruffed grouse. We used to have snowshoe hares here in the Appalachians. We lost those, you know, with warming temperatures decades ago. So, all right. Now, what do a lot of people in the general public think about timber harvest on public land? Timber harvest bad, right? So you've got NGOs, well-meaning people, members who are paying their money to try to save the trees because the Lorax said we should, right? Save the trees, don't harvest the forests. And what do? These NGOs say, give us your money, we will hire lawyers, and anytime the Cherokee National Forest proposes a new timber harvest, we're gonna sue their ass, okay? And they've been doing that for decades. And Sometimes they win, sometimes they don't, but these lands get locked up in litigation for years. And those cumulative lawsuits from lots of different groups, whether they win or not, they're having to pay millions of dollars to fight those suits. And so a lot of times they've said, you know what, we're gonna lose more money paying the lawyers than we would make, you know, just managing the forest with clear cuts. So our timber harvest on public land has decreased a great deal over the last several decades. We're still doing it, but nowhere near as much as we used to. And that is another reason that rough grouse aren't doing very well in our southern forests, because we're not able to do the intensive forest management that created those early successional conditions that they liked. Now, that's probably helped late successional species, you know, I mean, different species like different things, but it is what it is. I'm not judging, I'm just saying that what's that?
It's just a fact.
It's a fact, and it's interesting. It's kind of fascinating. Those people, their intentions are good, but they really don't understand the full range of ecosystem dynamics and the impacts they're having. Oh, the other is road policy. So to have a clear cut, you have to have a road that goes back to it, right? Here's another example of where those groups are, and they know what they're doing. This is just me. So you've got, for example, and this gets into fiscal policies, you've got the Cherokee National Forest builds a road, and it costs them $10 million, okay? Now, here at the back end, they do a clear cut, and they make $1 million. And then they do another clear cut next year, make $1 million, next year $1 million, next year $1 million, next year $1 million. And over the course of the next 20 or 30 years, they're gonna get their $10 million back, right? But what a special interest group can do, and what they have done sometimes, is said, you built a road this year for $10 million and you only made $1 million off the clear cut that you built the road for. You're managing our public lands at a loss. That's our money, you are our public servants, and you're losing money. And they're like, we're gonna gain money in the long run. They're like, no. What you did this year was you spent 10 million and you made 1 million, you lost money. That should be against the law, we're suing you. So they play games like this. So that forces the Forest Service, the federal government, to come up with alternative strategies. And a lot of the time those strategies mean we're not gonna be able to go back as far as we used to harvest the way we did. Or sometimes maybe that might mean when we do harvest our clear cuts, instead of being a couple of little 20-acre clear cuts, which is nice, we're gonna make a 200-acre clear cut, which is not as good. It doesn't create those heterogeneous conditions as much. Yeah.
Why wouldn't they go like at a steady pace, just like a little bit of the road to make $1 million?
And they do that too, but you know, and I'm no road engineer, you know, but you know, I think probably you get all the people and all the supplies and all the planning, and if you can do it at once, you'll save money more than of several little chunks at a time. So, you know, it looks like if you look at the number of the hunters has been fairly consistent, and this is old data, but they had variable success, right? And that success is tied to the number of trips they make, but the number of trips they make is based on success as well. So does that suggest that Tennessee rough grouse populations are cyclic as well? Not really. Because it's not a 10-year cycle like you see in the Northwest or in the Northeast. And we think that these populations are so small and low that there's a lot more stochastic factors impacting populations. And that can include things like forest management, you know, how many clear cuts there are, you know, this year, this decade, and a lot of other factors. We don't know. We don't really have a good feel for it. The numbers are very low and very difficult to survey.
So, yeah, like I said, I think I already showed you this earlier, this was 1970, and we had some pretty high densities, you know, in the Appalachians. By 1996, they were lower, and today they're lower still. They don't have that map anymore, but the populations have continued to decline. All right, we've got 6 minutes or so. Let's brainstorm. Let's say that you guys are the TWRA Upland Gamebird team. Based on the grand expertise that you now have about upland gamebirds in Tennessee, what are your priorities for Tennessee's upland gamebirds for the next 10 years? And that is quail, grouse, and turkeys. What you got?
I think if we could either acquire more land for quail habitat or transfer some other areas of WMAs into focal areas.
Okay, that's interesting. That begs a question that didn't come up. One of the things that a lot of state agencies have struggled with when they said these focal areas have to be 1,500 acres of optimal quail habitat with at least 25% of the chunk, they're like, we don't have that many WMAs that are that big. Most of our WMAs are smaller than that. We don't have many 3,000, 6,000 acre WMAs that have potential for quail habitat. But you don't have any farms that big either, so what do? You start with the biggest WMA that you can find, or biggest chunk of public land you can find, be it a WMA or a chunk of the National Forest or whatever, and then you work intensively with those local landowners that are connected to it to try to provide them extra signing bonuses to put a bunch of their land into easements as much as you can, right?
Look, there's a lot of areas that people don't think are good habitat. I mean, like you said, Wolf River, it's bottomland.
Right.
And there's a ton of great habitat there.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, you can build it a lot of the time, not always, but a lot of the time. Yeah. Okay. So, what do you guys think about Noah's idea? Identify more spots for focal areas or for good quail habitat. We've got 5. Let's find some more. Okay. What else?
I have a question about the rough grouse. So you said it's kind of expected for them to kind of start receding upwards north, which is. That's what
I expect. I've never heard a biologist say that out loud in front of a crowd. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was just curious because if we're expecting that, then how much effort should we really put into that if that's what is trending with other species?
What do you think, guys?
Can't fight climate change.
Yeah.
Right. And we can't say absolutely that climate change is resulting in us losing the species, period. It's not that black and white.
Yeah. Still focus on okay, yes, rough grouse need habitat, but if it's expected to kind of leave the state,
Yeah.
then maybe we should just leave it up to other states.
What do you think, Braden, about that? Sorry, didn't mean to call you out there.
I think if there's reason to believe we can make the populations go up and stay, then yes, for our state agencies.
Okay.
But if it's national agencies, I think they should focus on getting them up anyway.
Okay.
Because it's a national.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
I think especially considering a lot of their receding could be due to population. And I don't think the TWR is doing anything wrong managing them because their numbers aren't due to over harvest or anything. So
Yeah.
I think they're doing what they can to manage them like they always have.
Yeah. Kirk, what do you think about what Amber said? That if we're maybe going to lose them and probably their numbers aren't going to explode, should we?
It would set a bad precedent to give up on them.
Okay.
To give the impression that you're giving up on them, because you'll never be able to explain to somebody a
Yeah.
scientific reason for reducing management indefinitely.
Okay. So don't say you're giving up, but would you add anything to that?
I don't think you should give up. I think it would set a bad
Okay,
precedent one way or
okay.
another to.
But I mean, should we intensively try to shovel all the money we can at them, or maybe?
I'd at least want to maintain it. You may be able to
Okay.
pitch them, allocating resources elsewhere.
Okay. All right. Kate, what do you think?
I think what you were saying, you can say one thing but do another. I mean, focus your resources on something else.
Gotta be, gotta be careful, you know, you don't wanna get caught out, you know, in what's perceived as dishonesty or a lie. You wanna be as transparent as you can, but,
You're also in Tennessee, if you tell somebody it's because of climate change, they're gonna lose their mind.
Yeah, yeah,
Yep. But it is, there it is. We've got one more minute. What else? 10 years, priorities.
I think working with private landowners to try to increase the quality of the habitat to provide, you know, those areas for the species to be able to cross over to get access to other areas and, you know, other coveys and whatnot.
So maximize metapopulation dynamics to the degree that possible. Are you thinking mostly for quail? Are you thinking for turkey, for everything?
I mean, for everything, but yeah, I guess especially for quail, because that's kind of crucial for them, but yeah, I would say for as much